Hello, dear. I'm glad you were able to make it. Was your flight enjoyable? Yes, I know it was a bit of a long trek to get here. And you're probably very tired. Don't worry. You will have plenty of time to see Egypt tomorrow. But how about I read you a story to help you go to sleep? No, not a bedtime story. But they are stories about our gods and goddesses. It would be best for you to start learning some of their names and their history. So, I have a book here. It's even called A Guide to the Gods, Goddesses, and Traditions of Egypt. So, go ahead and lay down, get comfy, and I'll read you some stories until you fall asleep. No, we will not be able to go through all of the gods and goddesses. There are far, far too many for that. But we can get started, and if you liked it, perhaps another night that you are here, I can read some more. Alright. So we're going to start, of course, with the A's. Some entries are rather short, and others are longer. We're first going to start with Aker. Aker was an earth god who guarded the eastern and western horizons. He took the form of a pair of conjoined sphinxes facing away from each other. So one would look at the east horizon and one would look at the west. We'll hear more about him when we get to S for Sphinx. Next is Akhet. The horizon, a place of transition for gods and the dead, was known as Akhet. The double horizon consisted of the western horizon, where the sun god died at sunset, and the eastern horizon, where he was reborn at sunrise. The standard image of the horizon was a sun disk between two mountain peaks. Two shining trees grew on these mountains, and the double horizon was guarded by a double sphinx or twin lions. So, Akhet and Aker go together. A lot of these gods, as you will hear, gods and goddesses, have some conflicting stories because Egypt's history is very long and vast. And so sometimes when some pharaohs would come into power, they did not like that this certain god was with a certain story. So they would change the gods around. So a lot of gods might end up having the same history, the same stories, part of what makes Egypt beautiful. Ammut, Ammut, Ammut was a monstrous goddess who devoured the hearts of the evil dead. We will hear more about her under what she is known as. We do not typically call her by her name, but she typically has the head of a hippopotamus. So we will come across her when we get back to H for the hippopotamus goddesses. Amun, which is also known by a few different names: Amun, Amanin, Amin. We're gonna call him Amun, and he has quite an entry here. So get ready. Amun was the mysterious creator god whose name meant hidden one. He was the most commonly shown as a bearded man in the prime of life, wearing a headdress surmounted by a double plume. His origins are obscure, but Amun and his female counterpart, Amunet or Amunet, were listed among the divine protectors of the king in the pyramid text. Amun and Amunet were part of the group of 8 primeval deities who came to be known as the Agdod of Hermopolis. Agdod. An interesting word, isn't it? During the Middle Kingdom, Amun gradually became the chief god of the Theban area, where he acquired a new consort, Mut, and a son, Kansu. In the New Kingdom, the cult of Amun was combined with that of the creator's sun god, Ra. Amun-Ra was worshipped as the king of the gods and the creator of the world and its inhabitants. In his chief cult temple at Karnak in Thebes, Amun, lord of the thrones of the 2 lands, ruled as a divine pharaoh. Unlike other important deities, Amun does not seem to have been thought of as a living in some distant celestial realm. His presence was everywhere, unseen, but felt like the wind. His oracles communicated the divine will to humanity. Amun was said to come swiftly to help Egyptian kings on the battlefield or to aid the poor and friendless. When he was manifested in his cult statues, Amun periodically visited the necropolis of Thebes to unite with its goddess Hathor and bring new life to the dead. Amun tended to be the subject of speculative theology rather than mystical narratives, but he did play a role in the creation myths of Hermopolis. One of his incarnations was as the Great Shrieker, a primeval goose whose victory shout was the first sound. In some accounts, this primeval goose laid the world egg. In others, Amun fertilized or created this egg in his ram-headed serpent form, known as Kermatif. There we go. I apologize. Like the many different stories The temple of Murden and Taboo in western Thebes was sometimes identified as the location of this primal event. A cult statue of the Amun of Karnak regularly visited this temple to renew the process of creation. By the end of the New Kingdom, Amun was often depicted as a virile ram with curved horns, or as a ram-headed sphinx. It was in these forms that he was primarily worshipped in Nubia and Libya. As early as the Middle Kingdom, Amun had been linked with the god Min to become the embodiment of male sexual power. Amun-Rin, the bull of his mother, was an ITHYPHALLIC self-generating god. ITHYPHALLIC. This word is in bold. Normally that means that there is a definition somewhere for it. Would you like me to find it for you? Okay. So I found what the word means. However, I'm sure you can determine it yourself. It does have something to do with the word phallic. So it just means that was his form most of the time when he was Amun. Let's continue with Amun. We're almost done with him, I swear. Amun-Ra was the mysterious originator of all life, the one who made himself into millions. In the temples of Thebes, he was given a partner in the form of a royal priestess known as the god's wife, or God's hand. One of her duties seems to have been to physically arouse the god so that he would continue the ongoing work of creation by generating life. Like the ram god, Amun was said to mysteriously unite with the Queen of Egypt to sire the heir to the throne. This royal birth myth was depicted in several Theban temples. The idea persisted as late as the Greco-Roman period, when legends were told about how the world-conquering Macedonian king, Alexander the Great, was sired by Amun. Alexander seems to have been acknowledged as the god's son when he made a pilgrimage to the remote temple of Amun at Siwa Oasis. According to some classical writers, Alexander and his companions were in danger of dying in the desert when two serpents appeared to lead them safely to Siwa. The oracle of Amun at Siwa was believed to be infallible. The Greeks wove it into their own mythology, claiming that the heroes, Perseus and Heracles, had consulted Amun, or as the Greeks called him, Zeus. It's interesting how histories tend to copy one another, do they not? Of course, Egypt is the best, as its history is so vast, and its gods and goddesses so plentiful. daughter of Ra and a consort of the storm god Seth. She was a formidable defender of the sun god and protected kings on the battlefield. In Egyptian art, Anat was usually represented as a woman carrying a shield, a spear, and an axe. One spell refers to Anat fighting alongside Ra against a troop of wild donkeys who embodied the forces of chaos. So fierce was this contest that Anat gathered the blood of the wounded sun god in 15 metal bowls. King Ramses III claimed that Anat had been his shield in the equally desperate struggle against the invading sea peoples. In Egypt, Anat was called the Great Cow of Seth. In a myth used in several spells, Seth sees the sun goddess bathing and has sex with her. Only the creator sun god is allowed to mate with the seed goddess, so this sacrilegious act poisons Seth. Anat, the woman who acts like a warrior, hastens to her father Ra to demand help for Seth. Perhaps out of fear of his warrior daughter, Ra has Isis cure Seth with her magic. We will be hearing much more obviously about Ra, but Seth is a very important part of Egyptian mythology, and we'll hear about him much, much later. Andjety, or Andjety, was the local god of Busiris, whose attributes were the crook and the flail. When we get to Osiris, we will hear more about this. Anti. An Upper Egyptian falcon god who was brutally punished for his crimes against the gods. Anti was closely associated with both Horus and Seth. He was usually depicted as a falcon in a boat, but he could be shown as a griffin or as a man with the distinctive head of the Seth animal. Anti sometimes embodies the bad qualities of Horus, but in coffin text spell 942, he is a manifestation of Seth who is shaved or skinned by a goddess in revenge for turning the land upside down. A myth in Papyrus Jumalak explains why the cult statue of Anti is made of silver rather than gold. Anti was condemned for some terrible crime that he had committed, probably the decapitation of a cow goddess. His skin and his flesh were flayed off his bones as a punishment and hung on a pole. Like all gods, Anti's flesh was made of gold, and his bones of silver, so only the silver was left. When Anti was forgiven, the cow goddess restored his flesh with her healing milk. Anti seems to be identical with Nimtree, another divine falcon who was punished by the gods. In a New Kingdom story, the divine tribunal retires to an island to consider whether to award the crown of Egypt to Horus or Seth. The deities who make up the tribunal do not want to be disturbed by Iris, the mother of Horus. They order Nimtree, the divine ferryman, not to take any woman who looks like Iris. Oh, my apologies. Iris is not the mother of Horus. Isis is the mother of Horus. My apologies. They ordered Nimtri, the divine ferryman, not to take any woman who looks like Isis to the island. Isis disguises herself as an old hag and bribes Nimtri with a gold ring to ferry her to the island. After she makes a fool of Seth, he demands that Nimtri be punished. The divine tribunal orders all Nimtri's toes, or claws, to be chopped off. Nimtri vows that gold shall be taboo in his town forever, providing another example for the use of silver in his temples. This was not the end of Nimtri's misfortunes. A spell recounts how Horus and a god who is probably Nimtri travel together in a golden boat. When Nimtri is bitten and poisoned, he begs Horus to heal him. Horus offers to help in exchange for Nimtri's true name. Nimtri tries to fool him by giving the grandiose name of other deities, but in the end he has to tell the truth. Horus cures him and gains lasting power over Nimtri. Let's end our stories tonight with a very famous god that I'm sure you've heard quite a lot about. Anubis. He also is known by a few other names. Anbu, Inbu, Anbu, Inbu, Anbu, Inbu. Anubis was the terrifying canine god who presided over the mummification of bodies and guarded burials. He was usually shown as a seated black jackal, or as a man with the head of a jackal or wild dog. Anubis helped to judge the dead, and he and his army of messengers were charged with punishing those who violated tombs or offended the gods. Most people see Anubis as a bad god, but he is actually one of the great gods. He has a very divine purpose of mummification and of keeping watch of tomb raiders or people who try to challenge the gods. The jackals and wild dogs who live on the edge of the desert were carrion eaters who might dig up shallowly buried corpses to avert this horrible end for their dead. The early Egyptians tried to placate Anubis, the dog who swallows millions. Most of the epithets of Anubis link him with death and burial. He was the one who is in the place of embalming, the lord of the sacred land, the desert cemeteries, and the foremost of the Westerners, that is, the leader of the dead. Anubis had a female counterpart, Ammut, who is also shown as a jackal. For most of the Old Kingdom, Anubis was the most important funerary deity. His face this myth as the god who invented a mummification to preserve the corpse of Osiris. He became the chief guardian of the mummy of Osiris and a supporter of Isis and her son, Horus. Anubis came to be regarded as a son of Osiris, but the darker side of his character was remembered in the epithet, the one who eats his father. The one who eats his father. Anubis's title, Master of Secrets, chiefly referred to the gruesome secrets of the embalming tent. He was particularly associated with the bandaging of mummies and with the ceremony known as the opening of the mouth ritual. This was performed to give the mummy back the senses it had enjoyed in life. In the Book of the Dead, Anubis is shown in the throne room of Osiris, supervising the weighing of the hearts of the dead. Among his duties was to fetch the hearts of the followers of Seth. A story recorded in the first millennium BCE tells how the wicked god Seth disguised himself as a leopard to approach the body of Osiris. He was seized by Anubis and branded all over with a hot iron. This, according to Egyptian myth, is how the leopard got its spots. Anubis then flayed Seth and wore his bloody skin as a warning to evildoers. By this era, Anubis was said to command an army of demon messengers who inflicted suffering and death. Anubis remained an important funerary god in the Roman period, but his cult was singled out for abuse by Roman writers. This may have been partly because of his popularity with necromancers. Demonic spells explain how to summon Anubis, the keeper of the keys to the underworld, by methods such as drawing his image in the blood of a black dog. When he appeared, Anubis was used as a go-between to fetch gods and spirits from the underworld to answer the magician's questions. Anubis also acted as an enforcer of curses, a role he plays to this day in horror films. I think we'll stop there for tonight. I'll go ahead and mark the spot so we don't lose our progress. I hope you enjoyed hearing about some of our gods and goddesses. But now it is time for you to get some sleep. And tomorrow, I will show you around Egypt. And then we might read some more stories. We are only a fraction into our gods and goddesses, and there are many, many more. Have a good night.